The 19th century was a dangerous place at the best of times, but here in Crytek's version of it, out in the bayou, it looks like it's filled with monsters, witches, creatures, creepy crawlers and all kinds of death at every turn. So maybe it's better just to stick to the historical version rather than this one. A game that's long been in development right back 2014. It was announced alongside some other great big hitters, and it had a troubled past, likely from Crytek's own financial troubles, but it isn't really in the same form of the original intention. Originally going to be a co-op based title with a single player element, it's now moved into a complete online multiplayer title. There's no single player element here aside the training section, which kicks the game off. The original title, free-to-play title, was going to be a co-op base, more in the lines of Left 4 Dead, where you went in certain missions, destroying the enemies, the AI-controlled characters, and battling out in a third-person battler, and then went on to kill the meanie or the baddie at the end of the level. And that's changed dramatically to what we get now. Visually, it's taken a huge leap forward. One of those big changes is it's moved from third to first person. This helps with the animation system because you don't have to spend all that time animating multiple characters, and we can see here in the demo that was originally shown back in 2014, it was one of the areas they still had things to work on. This looked like a very early build. Now the improvements in terms of visuals are quite stark. PBR based materials, much better lighting, and overall the enhancements to the Crytek engine have helped dramatically for a visually splendid looking game on face value, and it's certainly better than the original one back in 2014, but that was a long time ago, 6 years now, so we are having higher expectations, even though this has been in free to play or at least early development views on Steam and Xbox for the past year or so. Here I'm covering it on the Xbox One X and the Xbox One Standard to see what it delivers. This isn't a technical review, this is just a technical analysis and performance review. A summary of the game itself is you have two main modes online. You can jump in with a team of 3 people and you work through a map trying to find where the creature lives by searching for clues, then using your magical powers to find the area. It closes the map out and then you rush to kill this big meanie somewhere in the middle of the centre of the map, and then everyone else that's playing with you can try and fight it out whilst that is banished into the other realms, and you steal all the wins, run off and escape to the next level. That's essentially what it does. Or the other option is you go in completely naked with just a sword in your hand on your own, 1v1 or 1v10, and you run around trying to do the same thing with no teammates in hand. The choice is yours. Obviously the latter is slightly more difficult. But in terms of the game itself, it uses the Cry engine, and again it's a beautiful looking game. But it isn't a game that blows me away in terms of visual quality. There's some nice lighting in there. It uses volumetric light, screen space reflections, and they've done some good work on the screen space reflections to try and minimise some of the standard artefacts you see. So they've taken a triangle at the edge of each area where you normally get the culling point of screen space reflections on the frustum, and they've just reflected that last element back in, so almost like a mirrored image to try and minimise the noise. You can still see it, but it does stop that stark drop off that you get on the frustum edges of a camera and again at the front. But all the other telltale signs that Crytek introduced with SSR way back in the day on Crysis 3, then it is really a title that doesn't stand out that much over and above many of the games we've played over this generation. It's got some nice lighting, some great textures and some decent quality and quite haunting looking creatures throughout, and that is a high point. What is also a very strong high point, and in my opinion the best part about the game when you're playing it, is the sound design, sound execution and delivery. It's certainly a game that benefits from a DTS system or a 3D surround headset, as all the creepy crawlers, the murder of crows and all the screeching sounds does genuinely make you jump when you're running through and you hear something rushing up behind you and you turn and there's these monsters in tow. That is a good and strong element of the title, and one that I really enjoy. But visually, I'm a little disappointed that they've not done more with the Cry engine. It's been a long time in gestation, and I do feel as if there's lots of elements here that were started for the original intention, and then when it was canned, this has been brought back to life and basically hurried out because it was so close to a deliverable episode in terms of the multiplayer element, and that's what's been delivered. Some of the animation routines can seem a little weak compared to what you would normally get. Certainly when you're putting yourself out on fire, there's not even a patting motion you'd see in something like Crysis or even Far Cry. It's more like a rubbing your arm. It's a bit weird, and it does let down some of the animation areas of the title itself. But also the world is quite static and flat. No movement from sheets, no physics, no interaction, so that's a bit of a shame. But, like I say, this doesn't stop it from being a gorgeous looking game overall. Visually and artistically, it's very strong. Lots of bright bloom, sunlight, crepuscular rays beaming through the trees, lots of dense foliage across the landscape, and obviously the material system here is very, very good indeed. What lets it down overall, though, like I say, is the static elements of the title and the repetitive nature. There's some weak textures in there, low map levels, and between the two consoles, there's hardly any difference in terms of effects. Certainly the LOD can pop in quite heavily in the title, and that's worse on the Xbox One S than it is on the Xbox One X, but it is present on both machines. But the biggest difference between the two consoles is down to resolution, unsurprisingly. Now, the Cry engine has always been a strong, beautiful looking title since generation began with a TAA element, and that is no different here. Running at 900p, 1600 by 900 on the Xbox One S, with a looks like a reconstruction element if you stay still on that TAA across the top, although the AA is not as strong or is not as complete on the S as it is on the X. The X comes in 4 times that at 3200 by 1800, so that's identical to what Microsoft's plans were in terms of boosting the performance of the Xbox One S up 4 times to reach that 4K level. And that obviously delivers a much sharper, crisper image, and that improves over on shadow quality, motion blur quality, processing effects overall, and obviously the texture filtering, which is much sharper and cleaner. And this is evident on a 1080p screen and a 4K one, so it's certainly the best version to play in terms of visuals. And that brings us to the final element of the coverage, and that is the performance. Now, loading is one of the big problems the title has. It can take minutes, and I mean minutes, 5 minutes to load a game sometimes, and a game that's based completely online, the matchmaking is far too slow. They really need to work on that and improve that level. I don't know what they do, whether they keep people in groups, and that would help, but the loading of matchmaking is very slow, and it was difficult to find people online. The servers only opened up across PS4, which is also available on this week, and that's delayed some of the coverage here in terms of what I could get out. But unfortunately, that is one of the problems with the game online. It's always going to be a problem with the game online because it's as good as the online people you're playing with. Now, if you've got people online and friends to play with, then that makes it a lot better and more enjoyable, because that's where the laughs and enjoyment comes from. And then performance, they both run at 30 FPS, but the Xbox One S and the X both run an adaptive VSync, allowing the screen to tear completely from top to bottom on occasional points. Now, this is consistent when you change into the Hunter mode, which obviously changes the render completely, and this is likely down to the fact that it's just memory shifting or CPU cache change or coherency or whatever it's going on there, but it's consistent on both versions. When you change the view, you will get a couple of seconds, milliseconds, 80, 90 milliseconds at times of a hang, and then that's usually preceded by a little tear, then a skip into 16 milliseconds. It's very minor, you wouldn't have noticed it with outside of this analysis. That's really where you see it, but it can also occasionally tear and judder when it's in heavy alpha effects or heavy combat and post-processed effects and distortion on the screen. On both versions, they run pretty much identical levels of performance, and by and large, it is a locked and stable 30 FPS, consistent at 33 milliseconds with no issues overall. It's a good looking title, and it's an enjoyable one if you have friends, and visually it's very impressive indeed at certain points, but like I say, it does feel like a game from maybe 3 or 4 years ago that's just been given a spit and polish, and it would have been nice to see more elements to the game added in, and maybe some mission levels where you're not all out for each other and actually working towards a single goal. In some ways, the original reveal had a better look to me than what I see here in the final title. But it is a cheaper title, around £28 or $30, $40 I think. So it's not an expensive one, and it is one that many people may like. But for me, online has to have a lot more to give, and this really isn't giving me enough to dip into. It's good to see CryEngine still kicking out some bangers here, and visually it is up there with the best of the CryEngine titles I've seen on that level, but it needs more in the world and more to do to really draw me in. Anyway, I hope you guys and girls enjoyed this fast look at the Hunt Showdown and just how it runs on the Xbox One consoles. You can obviously imagine that the PS4 one will be somewhere in between, so PS4 will be 1080p, PS4 Pro probably around 1440p with very similar performance. But that's it, I'm out, I'll catch you on the next one.